Stampers and Crafters. Welcome to session 2 of our 6-part series in Stampin Blends 101. If you missed series 1, I will put a link to it below on the blog. If not, you'll find it on my blog, but I'll put a link below so you can catch up. In this session, we are going to work on the light source theory. Now, to create dimension in your objects or projects that you are coloring, you need to kind of break down an image into 3 categories, okay? You need to break it down into highlights, midtones, and the shadows. So to do this, it kind of means, to break it down a little bit, it means the highlights are going to be where the light hits an object. Okay, it's going to be the brightest part of an object. The midtone is going to be the shadow that's between the highlight and the darkest part of your shadow. Now, why is this important? When you do this, it creates dimension and shape in your image. Okay? So, we are going to work on a way that you can kind of work on these little worksheets, and they really make kind of learning your light source a little bit easier. So we want to do our best to try to show the highlights, the midtones, the shadows. We also want to show the cast shadows. Okay, a cast shadow is basically the shadow that an object emits. Okay, so if I were to take my marker right now, okay, see how the light hits my hand, and do you see the shadow below? Okay, as it gets closer, the shadow's closer and smaller. It gets farther away, the shadow has distance, and it may even have a little white spot before you see the cast shadow. That is a cast shadow. So that's going to give your image depth. Okay, so we're going to do this, and the first thing you need to do with any image is determine where your light's coming from. Okay, so we're going to do it 3 different ways here on a square and a circle. Best thing to learn on. Okay, it's simple, but it gives you the concept. Now, we aren't going to be doing dark and midtones, but we are going to do highlights and shadows with just one marker and our color lifter. Okay, now color lifters, they call them blenders, but we'll go into that further when we get along in the series. They really aren't used to blend your ink. Okay, they are used to, fix boo-boos, but they can be used. Okay, we'll go into the blender and the different things it's capable of in one of the sessions later on. Meanwhile, so what we want to do, I have one marker, and what you can do is print your worksheet and follow along if you'd like. Okay, I am simply using a very light gray marker. This happens to be our light smoky slate. Okay, I will zoom in this a little. Let me see if I can zoom in my camera a little bit. Okay, so now I also want to discuss when you are coloring. A lot of people just lay their sheet on top of their grid sheet, their paper. Okay, that's okay, but I have found working with alcohol markers, the wetter it stays, the better it blends. Okay, so if you're working on a big image, even a small one, you don't want to have your paper on another piece of paper that's going to absorb the ink from behind. Because if you're doing your images right, your ink is bleeding through. It's exactly what it should be doing. Okay, but if it's bleeding through and it's sitting on paper, it's going to suck that ink out of there. and we don't want it to suck it out. We want to move it around. We want to blend it, okay? So I have a glass mat on my normal workstation over there. Here, this, it's not real wood. It's, I don't know what it is. It would probably be okay. It won't absorb anything. If you don't have something like this, real good thing to use doing cards is your silicone mat. That will keep your image wet. You could even use one of the plates from your Big Shot machine, your Stampin' Cut machine. That's not going to absorb water. Or often, if I'm doing a large image, all I'll do is take a piece of acetate. This is a simple piece of clear acetate, and I'm going to set it underneath here, and we're set to go. Okay? Now, if you're doing really tiny images, it may not matter. But like I said, I'm teaching you what I've learned. And what I've learned is I want my ink to stay wet because it will move, it will blend much easier. Okay? So we're going to grab our light smoky slate. We have our color lifter, and I have just a yellow marker that I'm going to use just to give us an idea of where our light source is coming from. So on this first set of images, we're going to have our light source. I'm going to draw a little tiny sun there coming from the left, which means it's hitting your object on this side. Okay? This one, we're going to put straight above it, which means the light's going to be hitting the very top of your box. This one, you put your light source off to the right, which means it'll hit your box this way. Okay? We're going to do the same thing here with our circles, so we know what we're doing here. Now, you always want to determine before you start coloring where your light source is coming from. Okay? If I showed you an image, now sometimes the artist of a stamped image will tell you where the light source is coming from, which is awesome. But a majority of the time they don't. It's a flat image, and you have to determine where you want the light source to come from. A good example. Let me see if I have one sitting here. Here's from that Easter Friends. See this little duck? I just stamped him. I haven't colored him, I haven't done a thing. But what the artist is telling you here, just by looking at the way the image is stamped, the light source is coming from over here. Because see the light on his belly and the light right here on his shoulder, on the light on this side of his head? So the artist is telling you, here's your light source. Color accordingly. Even on the stamp here, they've got it a little bit darker. Right here. Right on the side that's farthest from the light source. So if you're lucky enough, look at your artist image of the stamp. It may tell you where your light source is. Okay? And then you can color accordingly. Alright? So this is just how I did him. And by putting some little shadows in there, it makes him look like a little chunky chick. But anyway, so pay attention to that also. But what we're going to do is we're going to work with a flat image, and we're going to create our own light source. So we're going to start on the first one here. Let me move some stuff out of my way. I got stuff everywhere. Okay, so I personally like to use my feather tip. You can use whatever you like. And I learned a technique that I'm still learning. I'm still perfecting it. Where you hold your marker with it sitting on this finger here. And it seems to give you a little more control of the marker. Because what we're going to be doing, and I'll teach this in the blending session. I think the blending session is next, number 3. But we are going to take our marker, we're going to set it down, and we're going to flick it. Okay? Nope, I'm not even in camera there. So we're going to layer, and I've got my brush tip kind of to the side here. And I'm just going to lay it down, and I'm going to flick some color. And what this jagged edge right here is going to give you is an automatic blending area, okay? And by holding the marker this way, now like I said, I'm just learning that. I usually hold my marker like a pen. But I found when I hold it like this, I actually do have the control to go down and flick up, because you want your hardest part of where you're holding this down there, and then you want to kind of twist your hand and flick it up, okay? And that's going to give you a blending edge to work with. We'll go into more of that a couple sessions on. So now, if we have our light source coming from here, that means the top of the box and right on this left side, that's all going to be illuminated and highlight. Okay, that's going to be your highlights. Further toward the back, we're going to have our midtones. And then way back here, we're going to be all in shadow because the sun can't hit it. So we're going to take and color in that whole back panel. Okay. And you can layer it on there, get a nice coating. There you go. But now remember, some of our light is hitting the edge of this over here. So what we want to do, and I usually flip my sheet to whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm going to lay my brush down, and I'm going to flick some light over it. I'm going to flick it over. Oops, I went a little far there, but that's okay. So I want this one edge right here to be the darker, so I can keep going over that. It's not going to hurt it. And what you want to do when you're doing these and doing blending is you want to keep that ink wet. So we're going to go right in, and we're going to take our blender. Now this works really good with white objects that you're trying to highlight some motion. I'm going to go just a little beyond that little feather I did, and I'm going to feather back toward it. And what that's going to do is that's going to soften that edge, and it's going to create your midtone. See how it's kind of, you got dark here, and that blender is just kind of created a midtone there. It's exactly what you want. Now remember, this box has a cast shadow. It's sitting on the ground. So we want to give it a cast shadow, and that cast shadow, if the light is coming from here, is going to be back here. So we're just going to create a little cast shadow. I'm going to go right along the bottom of the box there, and maybe just a hair right there, because remember there's a little shadow right there, and I'm just going to create a little shadow right there. Okay, there is cast shadow. Create a little feather edge there. Straighten out my line there, and then I'm going to take my blender again, and I'm going to go right into that little feather edge I created just to get my midtone and soften that edge. Okay, now when you're using your blender, you're not always going to see it working right away. Okay, what it's going to do is it's going to the wet is going to bleed into your other color, and see how it's created like a midtone right there? That's exactly what we wanted to do. Now we're creating our light, our midtone, and our dark simply with one marker. Normally, which you'll learn later on in the series, we're going to use 3 or 4 markers to create that same effect. Okay? But what I'm trying to teach you here is nothing more than having a highlight, a midtone, a shadow, and a cast shadow, and always recognizing where your light's coming from. Okay? So now this next one, we've got our light shining straight down on this box. Oops. So that means the top of the box is lit up, but we're not really going to be able to see right here because it's in the shade. The light's not getting to it. But it could be getting a little bit right there. So we're only going to go about halfway down. And you're going to flick that marker and create that feathered edge. Now we'll have more practice exercises doing that further along. Now if the light's coming straight down, that means we still got this other edge over here that's in shadow also. Look, I'm so habit to go back that way, but trust me when I tell you, I've been trying this and it seems to give you a little lighter hand. You do not need to use a lot of pressure using these markers. Okay? So now we're going to go back in. That ink is still nice and wet. We're going to go a little bit below it and we're going to flick into that feathered edge. We're just going to flick our marker. Just going to create that mid-tone for us. You'll see it depending on how wet your marker is. And if you think you went too far, you can always go right back in and darken up that dark area, that dark shadow area if you want to. Okay? Go back in there, do a few more flicks, and see how we get some really nice shadow there? Play with it. Take these and just play with them. Have fun. Okay, so now this box, our light is coming from the right, which means our shadow's going to be right here. It's going to be behind the top lid. Or the top of the box. Okay, I'm going to keep layering over there, feathering it down, making sure my darkest is right at the top of that edge. Okay? And before I do my cast shadow, while that ink is wet, I'll feather back into that feather right there. And that's going to give us our mid-tone and our light. So now this box, to give it a little bit of depth, that it's sitting on something, okay? If you want, and you need to have some perspective, maybe draw your table. Maybe that's the edge of your table, okay? So what you're doing now is that box is sitting on your table right there at the, and you have a cast shadow right there. It's going to be in an angle from the corner here, okay? And then just take your blender, lighten that edge ever so much. You just want to, what you're doing is giving perspective and dimension. Okay, so see how that looks like it's sitting on a table? There you go. And when you're doing circles, I myself even have trouble with circles because you're trying to create your circle to be, or your image that you're coloring to be kind of spheric. You want it to look round. So that means our shadow, okay, and sometimes I'll just draw right along the edge there, the line I need, and we're going to go in a half circle, okay, and that's going to give us that cylinder, okay, spherical look. Now I'm just going to take and feather out from there, making sure I go back into where I drew my line. Now feel free, move your paper around to whatever is comfortable for you. There's no rules there. So I'm just going to pull that out a little bit and give us that round look. Okay. Now our cast shadow, I'm going to go ahead and do that one. If your table is here, then maybe our cast shadow is right below here, and it's kind of a round shadow to indicate that it's a round ball. Okay. And we'll bring in our marker. I'm just, since this is the wettest part right here, I'm just going to soften those edges. And then I'm going to go back in, pull into those feather edges you did. If you want, you can also kind of drag in a little bit of a circle, and it's going to give you, you know what I mean? You'll automatically kind of create an even roundness to it. Okay, so there is our first circle. Now it's the same thing with this one. If the light is above it, that means there's shadows below. And it may not be as far as that one. So I draw my regular line, and then I feather up. Making sure that bottom's my darkest part. Come up the side just a little bit, because you want to give the the effect that it's round, which means it's not going to be a straight across line. And now this one, if the light is straight below it, you're going to have a shadow that is cast straight below it in kind of a circle form. Okay? Pardon me. And now I'm going to soften that one edge, and then we'll soften here. So you get the gist of this exercise. And the more you do it, the more it'll make sense if you're looking at a flower. Say that flower's got a round leaf, and there's another line that goes depicting the next petal. Maybe this flower leaf or this flower petal is on top of the other petal underneath. So that means you're going to have a cast shadow underneath. So that means your shadow is going to be underneath that flower petal. So that's where you kind of learn this. You want to determine exactly where your light source is coming from and follow it. So if my light's coming from here, my darkest part is going to be right here. I'm going to carry it around. And you want to kind of flick to where the lightest part of your marker is where you end. Okay, you're kind of picking it up. And now this one is going to have a little bit of an offset cast shadow. About there, because we got light right here. Okay, you picture where your light is. Okay. We'll soften our edge. Go ahead and soften that edge. And there you go. So this is your assignment this week. And then next week, let's see, what are we doing next week? I guess I need to find my instructions. What are we doing next week? We did marker charting. I'm going to have to pull up my sheet. I'm almost sure we're working on blending. We're going to do 3 tones, 4 tones. We're going to learn how to blend them together, how we're going to create our shadows, our highlights, our midtones, and our cast shadows. Because all of those are very, very important to give your images dimension while you're coloring. So go ahead and print this sheet below. There's a PDF. And start your homework, and we will see you next Monday. Bye-bye now.